Awesome. Hi, David. Well, my name is Jenny. Welcome to Miami Lit. Today I have David here. Thank you so much for joining me, David. I am so happy to have this conversation with you because today we're discussing, well, an array of books, but mainly Joan Didion's Miami. And as I was telling you just a few minutes ago, she's on my to be read list, but I had never considered to give this book a try. And it was such a treat for me to read. So thank you for that.
That's awesome. I recommend that book to anyone who moves to Miami. There's a couple books I always like that are like, I think in the canon of Miami to understand Miami. Cause I came here in 1996 from Washington, DC. And I came here like many because I wanted to be here. I had visited, I had friends from law school that were here and I liked it. And, I just started reading about it. And I think one of the things that this book speaks to me is I was at the Miami Book Fair one time and there was a guy who wrote a book about A1A, about the history of A1A and like a guide to A1A, just up and down the East Coast. And he said, what I'm answering is the question, like, when I'm here, where am I?
Okay.
And I think these books kind of answer that. Like, I think this book does a good job. Like, if you just get dropped off on a street corner of Miami, this book's an exploration of where are you?
Right. Yeah. It really exposes like almost a complete history of that time period that she focuses on. So it's definitely extremely interesting. And so many things that you would think if you're a native Miamian, that you don't really. Right? Especially now, so many years later, there's so much that's been forgotten or pushed to the side.
And I think the part of that, it's interesting you say that because I think that part of that is this idea of like when you read, like I remember as a kid reading Dickens and just not being like, not getting it. Like it was a chore. And I like books, right? But I didn't like Dickens. And I remember my father saying to me, like, make sure you read Dickens later. Like you'll get it later. So as a 30-year-old, I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant stuff. And I think that part of, I'd say the flip side of that is like the great novels now, the great art, I'm not sure is happening in London or New York anymore. Right. I think it's happening in places like Miami that are so vibrant. And I think that we're struggling to get a handle on where we are, right? To get a foothold of who we are as a people. A new society. I mean, I think about my personal experience. It's like I'm married to a Cuban American. I'm raising a bilingual kid. Like, what does all this mean? Who are we? We're not, you can't put us in boxes in Miami.
I think that's one of the most special things being here in the city is we are, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but we are a truly global city. There's so many people from so many different places, so many walks of life, so many different languages, and you can just come across all these people and experience their culture, and then you get to go home, around the corner. It's amazing.
It's funny you say it because I often say about Miami, it's like if you say you don't like Miami, it's almost like a little bit of an ignorant statement. Yeah, because it's like Miami, you can live on a horse ranch. Yeah. In the Redlands, right? Or you can live in a studio on Ocean Drive. Like there's almost like every experience. I mean, we don't have mountains, but short of that, it's like you can have whatever experience you want in Miami.
It's true. It's true. There's art. There's so much here, and sometimes that doesn't get highlighted for the rest of the world. And I think some people coming down here now, we have an influx of the Northeasterners and the Westerners coming down here. I think they're going to figure out that we are where it's at.
Yeah, we've got a unique culture.
Yeah, for sure, and it's really special. At least to me, it is. But I'm biased. So talking about Didion's work, I have some notes here because I just there's so much to dive into. Obviously, the book it's about the Cuban exile and just Miami coming together, but surprisingly to me, it was also the Washington, D.C. component to it. I was not expecting that. So a question about that. Did you come from Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
How was it for you?
Well, it's interesting. So I wasn't living in DC at the time, of all this, but we talked about Nicholas Griffin's new book.
Yes.
And he really talks about the interactions with the Carter administration. And there's a famous moment in that where Maurice Farray, the city of Miami mayor at the time, goes to DC to explain what's happening during Mariel.
Okay.
And like, we need help.
Yeah.
Like, we're in trouble. We're getting overrun by people who need like basic humanitarian services.
Right.
We can't feed these people. We can't clothe these people. We can't house these people. We need help. And they blew him off. And there's a moment in the book where he's like, oh man, like they ain't going to help us. Like, this is us. Like, this is the Miami community that has to do this. And the book talks about how, you know, the Cuban American community stepped up and they did all this stuff. And it was interesting because you asked about my experience. Like, I remember being, I went to Florida State undergrad, and I remember political science major. And I remember, you know, they would say at that time, the most successful immigrant group in the history of America are the Marielitos.
Really?
Like statistically.
Yeah.
Like we think of it like, you know, whatever image, and there's, you know, you came on a raft, and there's that I think in Miami, there's the politics of being a Marielito, but they have succeeded. And the reason they succeeded is the Cubans that came before.
Right. They had some sort of safety net.
They had a way
base
they had a base, right? Where that experience would have been, I think, a lot different if they'd gone to New York or they'd gone to Houston or, you know, wherever. Like Miami there was a cultural affinity, like, oh, these are our brothers and sisters. We got to help them succeed. Yeah. And they did it in a kind of off the grid way, right? An idea of like small businesses. I mean, we have a unique culture of, you know, I had for a long time at a law firm, I would have people come in from other cultures, from other countries. And this sounds so obnoxious, but I would always say to them, I'd sit them down in the beginning and I would say, okay, I have a couple assignments for you. One was you have to give a history of your country, like at a luncheon, like a presentation of history of culture, legal history of your country. And then the third is you're going to answer me a question at the end. And this is kind of obnoxious American, but I was like, you're going to tell me, why are we happier than you in our country? And they'd be like, well, is that true? I'm like, well, you know, you're going to answer the question at the end, but I think you're, you know, and at the end, I would always ask them, why are we happier? And they would be like, I didn't believe you, but it's true. And I would always say like we're fat, we're overworked, you know, we you know, we don't take vacation, but we're happier.
That's true. And that's a good point.
Can you guess what their answer always was? The answer always was?
Is it, I don't know, freedom? Yeah.
Opportunity. They did like
dream.
You can do whatever you want. And they would say, people from Europe would say like, listen, in my country, I can only rise so high.
Right.
I didn't go to the right schools. I don't have the right last name. And that's how a lot of the world is. And they would just be like, here, the sky's the limit. And then the other thing, the flip side of it was, I remember a girl from Bremen, Germany, and she said, all your friends, I'm not talking about my friends, all your friends work for themselves. You know, and she was talking about this pest control guy that we'd gone on the boat with. And she goes, she goes, I don't even know what that guy makes, but he's his own boss. Yeah. He's got his trucks. He does his thing. Right. And she's like, there is a joy of building a business. She's like, where I come from in Germany, like we all work for huge companies or the state. We don't have, you know, I don't know a lot of people like your pest control friend, you know, who's really enthusiastic about life. You know, part of it is he's an immigrant who came from nothing and just sees nothing but opportunity and raising his kids, and he's happy, and, you know, he's caught up in it.
I mean, I think that's the jewel, right? The crown jewel of this country. It's the opportunity that it offers everybody, no matter where you're coming from, what language you speak. If you put in the hard work, it seems to pay off. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of the Cubans figured that out quickly, and because where we're coming from, that's such a faraway dream, you know. No matter how hard you work, even if you're educated, like you're a doctor, that doesn't mean anything. No. You don't get paid. But I wanted to also bring up something that I thought was super interesting, and as we were saying earlier before we started recording, she touched upon the racial tensions between Blacks and the Cubans, and how so many Blacks lost opportunities because of this influx of the Cuban migration. And I understand why she didn't go much deeper into it, because that's not this book, but I kind of wish she had.
It's interesting you said, because I always try to explain, especially when I have African American friends that come in. Right. And I remember having a friend that came in, and remember I worked in Atlanta out of law school. I went to the University of Florida for law school, and I worked in Atlanta, and I worked in DC,
Mhm.
which are Black majority cities, right?
Right.
Black mayors, Black leadership, Black majority population in Washington, DC. I'm not sure about Atlanta, but DC is Black majority, residents. And so it's surprising when you come here.
Mhm.
I had Black friends that were doctors, lawyers, middle class. They're
Right.
solid middle class in those cities, right?
Right.
And then to come here and it's not as strong. The tradition's not as strong. And a friend of mine asked me one time, like he said, he was from Houston, and he said, I grew up in Houston, Black, very poor, single mom. My dad was incarcerated, and we were poor. And he's like, but we owned our house.
Yeah.
He's like, I was a crappy house, but we owned our house.
Right.
Everyone I knew owned their house, and my mom worked, right? Like for a company, like a good job. And he's like, where is that in Miami? Where are those people? Where's that Black community?
Right.
And it was interesting because I was like, well, there's a few pockets in South Miami,
Yeah,
and in Coconut Grove, it's around, but it's not as robust. Like I can't just drive you. Where in Atlanta, you can go to like really nice Black neighborhoods, right? Solid middle class, 100-year-old neighborhoods. And it's interesting because I'd like to explore that with you, because it's, in my experience, I would say that when you meet a Cuban American, sometimes their viewpoint can be a little less sympathetic.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is like they come to this country, they didn't speak the language, they didn't have a dollar in their pocket, they worked hard,
and they were able to
be successful,
quote unquote, succeed. Right.
Now, I think that, and that's a true story, right? There's no arguing with that experience.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems is a lot of times when I talk to those people, what do they look like? They're white.
They're
right?
the Cuban white, and they've had a different experience.
Well, it's to the extent of, I think that they failed to see that in the American experience. Like I think that there is a, they look white. The kids are marrying, they're not discriminated against in certain ways that we see with race. So
yeah, that's so interesting and so true too, because, and well, you said your wife is Cuban American, but Cuban, unfortunately, us as a culture, we also have a history with racism that's not so great either. Segregation, and culturally, there's a separation. No, not so much now, but in years past, 50 years ago, there was a very blatant separation. Whites marry whites, black marry black, and we keep it that way. So I definitely think that her bringing that up was kind of like a reality check.
Yeah, she brings it up in kind of an ugly way. Like it's not like she doesn't have a nice pat solution for.
And I appreciated that, because it is a reality that the Black community did suffer because of Cubans coming in here and just kind of taking over.
And so, and let me interrupt you on that, because it's interesting, because I brought you a present. First of all, it's so great to be here. I love that you're doing this show and having these discussions.
You.
So in a book club I'm in, we read a book called The Cubans, Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Times. It's by Anthony De Palma, and he is a New York Times reporter.
So much.
And I was saying to you earlier, part of my experience was being in political science in the late 80s. I had professors at Florida State who absolutely, like, I wouldn't say they adored Castro, but they were
sympathetic.
Yeah. And like, and also, let me be clear, like focused on literacy, health, like they would point to things, but they were definitely sympathetic to Castro.
Right.
And so or a cheerleader, I'd put it that way. And I personally really had cognitive dissonance, because then I would come to Miami to see friends, stay with families, and it'd be like it's like, oh, here's Tio Leon, and Tio Leon, Tio just got here from Cuba on a raft.
Right.
So here's my 18-year-old self being like, whoa, like, and you talk to the guy, and I speak Spanish, and I was like, whoa, and it was like, you saw the reality of it, right? Like that guy left.
It was so great.
Like
why would this guy put his life at risk for
exactly.
just to come here?
So I really So that was part of it. But this book, I think, doesn't. I was a little suspicious of it. I hate to say it because New York Times reporter.
Right.
Is it going to be a sympathetic portrayal? Mm-hmm. And it starts out incredibly sympathetic. It follows this one girl. The revolution happens. Here's this black, Cuban. Afro-Cuban woman,
right.
black.
Right.
And they ship her off to like Vladivostok or something in Russia to become an engineer. Mm-hmm. Just gets educational opportunity that she never would have had in pre-revolution.
Right.
Right. They send her, they educate her, and she rises to the top of the regime. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because she really does a good job of saying in her experience, and she talks about healthcare that happened to her, and she's in the best hospitals. She has access to power. She's living in beautiful apartments. She's traveling the world.
Right.
And she's talking about how she really struggles to say, like, how's this different? Like, we've just kind of moved the pieces.
Right.
Like the people in charge now are the revolutionaries.
Right.
But it's all the same system. Like I know that 99.9% of the people are not at this hospital.
Yeah.
And it was that general inequality. And then the book kind of comes full circle of, it really explores kind of the, like she ends up falling out of favor. They kick her out of her apartment and she gets ratted out by a neighbor for something. Like you just kind of exploration of all the problems that happen in a society that's not free.
Right.
The humiliations that happen from living like that. And she ends up, a mess and, living in a terrible apartment. And then the kids get on a raft, or they hijack a boat or something. The boat gets sunk by the Cubans, the Cuban army. And she loses like her son, her son and her grandkids that were her whole life. And so it kind of comes full circle. And I hate to give you a depressing read, but you don't leave that. It's pretty depressing.
But this is the job of literature, to bear witness and to not let these stories die out, because this is so important. This is a reality, an ugly one, but one that, because it's so ugly, we want people to remember. So, and I want to backtrack to what you were saying about being a college student and having these professors, tell you Castro is these amazing leader. Why do you think with higher education, there's this sort of like loving relationship with these ideologies? I don't know how else to put it, because I went to college, a few years later after you, and
You saw the same thing?
Yeah.
Where were you?
I was here in FIU.
You even at FIU saw it.
Yeah. Even there I saw it. The clubs of students just line up handing you pamphlets, wearing the T-shirts with Che Guevara on the front, and saying, planning trips to Cuba. And I never completely understood that whole thing. To me, it was so bizarre.
I think it's a little bit of I think at the end, Castro's legacy is going to be positive in a weird way, and it's going to be positive.
Well, the man is a genius. We can't.
That's what they're going to go to. They're going to say they're going to study him as forget his ideology, that he took power, that he kept power, and then basically thumbed his nose to the United States. So I think unfortunately, the way that the world is they're going to sell. Well, no, I shouldn't say unfortunately. They're going to celebrate that, because it is an accomplishment to have stayed in power, to have have played the Cold War in a way that worked for him. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It's an interesting thing, because I think that there is an effort to unseat the unfairness in the world. Yeah, it can be seen as like, and then I think, one of the things that someone said to me the other day, and it's very thought provoking. It was a professor, and she said to me on Saturday night, I was at a birthday party, and she said, what the pandemic has shown us is that people are willing to give up freedom for the smallest amount of comfort. Yeah. And I'm not sure I agree. I'm not saying that. I just found it very provocative. Like, I think that is one of the problems with society, is like, we are ready to say government solve this problem. It's
part of the human condition. We all want our comfort zone. We all want that safety that comes with comfort. And sometimes it doesn't matter the price you pay for that, because it feels good.
Yeah.
It's
Well, how about this? And the last thing I would say to you, you just made me think of when you said that, is it feels good. It also feels good to get off the competitive wheel.
yeah.
I think that there is a sense of like, I go to church every Sunday, and what are the messages? Like, what did Christ teach us?
Mhm.
Right? Do unto others. And
Yeah.
that effort of, and I'm not saying Christ was a communist or anything like that. I'm just saying that there is a feeling. It's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
can we just get along? Like,
Mhm.
why does society have to be this way? Why do we always
Right.
why do we have to wake up on Monday morning and just be like, I'm going to kick everyone's ass today?
Right.
Right. And we know, unfortunately, what's that thing they always say is like democracy and capitalism is the worst form of government,
Mhm.
except for, but it's better than everything else we've known.
Until we come up with something better, I think this is it. So, yeah, that's all. That's as far as I can go with that. I think so far we haven't come across something better, just because human nature plays such a factor.
So I have two other books that I brought you as presents that I want.
I'm so excited. You have no idea.
I have. So these are two books, and I would recommend everyone read this book. So it's called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. It's a New York Times bestseller, and it's an exploration of how racism costs white people. That racism costs disproportionately impacts white people. So I'm going to ask you. This is a good history question for you. So the question. So when the Supreme Court ordered that public pools be desegregated,
Mhm.
what did the white people in power do?
Oh gosh, I feel like I'm on the spot here. I don't know. Did they
close the pools?
Did they leave? Like, I don't want to be in the pool.
They closed the pools. They filled the pools in.
No pool for anybody.
So guess who that impacted?
Themselves.
Hundreds of poor white people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, 100 times more white people were using those pools than black people.
Right.
So it was like that was the example. That was just like one of the prime examples of how racism hurts white people. And so it kind of goes through everything. It says even like, for example, drugs. It's like, okay, crack epidemic happens.
Mhm.
We super criminalize controlled substances. Like
Right.
we super criminalize illegal drugs. So now who in this country now is disproportionately impacted? All the meth addicts who are white, rural, right? That's who's, instead of treating it as a health crisis, which is really what it is, we criminalize it. So who's suffering?
Yeah.
The white people. Disproportionately, it impacts white people. So it's an explanation of that. So I think everyone should read that. It is very provocative. It goes through education, through healthcare, through home ownership, things like that. And then the last one you made me think on the race issue is Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. Colson Whitehead was a Miami Herald reporter. Mm-hmm. And did you know this book at all?
No.
It's about there was a reform school up in Tallahassee that like they murdered kids. Like they found the kids were killed and buried on site in secret graves. And
oh my goodness.
It's a really bad thing. And of course, the victims a lot were black.
Yeah.
And the book talks about, we're talking about like the price of racism. Mm-hmm. There's a moment in the book, it's like, this is a good boy. He's going away to college. He actually so let me back up. It's a historical fiction account. And in the book, he's going to college and he hitches a ride with a guy. And the guy is, do you know what you're saying?
No, I was going to say, that's where I know him from, the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. There you go. You read that. There you go.
Oh, man.
And so in the book, the kid gets caught up in an innocent thing and he gets sent away to the reform school. Like he's going to college and he gets caught up and he goes to this reform school. And just all these terrible indignities happen, humiliations. It's just horrible what happens to him. And there's a moment in the book, I got to tell you, one of the most powerful moments I've ever had in literature, where he's like, okay, white people, you won. Because I hate you. Like my heart has turned black.
Yeah.
I hate you. And it's this very visual thing. He's like, I'm going to get out of here. And all I'm going to do is break white bones and knock white teeth out of white mouths. Yeah. He's like, and he's like, he was a sweet boy. And he's like, you've destroyed my soul. Like you hated me so much that now I hate you and you've ruined me.
Right.
And it just really, I don't know why it really hit me. Like it was like, wow, that's an impact of racism. Like creating people.
Right.
He didn't want to hate anybody. He just wanted to live his life. and the circumstances led, to it. The book has a twist, a plot twist that, whatever. But the point is that, it's a good exploration of,
Right.
we get you inside of the head of, a young Black guy that's caught up in the system that can't escape.
I'm looking forward
I keep hitting you with all these heavy books.
I know. You have no idea what this is for me. I love this. I wanted to ask you, where did your love for reading come from? Because
I want to ask you the same thing, because I think it's so cool that you're doing this show. Like, I think this is so great. So I'm a member of 2 book clubs, and I was a typical boy. Like, I love sports. I was smart. I had trouble in school because I'm sure I had ADHD. Like, I couldn't concentrate. And it actually soothed my mind. Like, I still read. I try to read every night for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And I swear I just sleep better. Like, I read. Last night I was reading somebody you're going to have on, Mario Ariza, Disposable City, another depressing book. And I'm reading all the science about basically how we're doomed. But I'm reading it, and I was just like, it was work. It was a chore to read it. I was tired after a long day. And I just but it just, as soon I shut that book and I fall right asleep.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is that. And then I think that also, in the book clubs, I find it's really good to sit down and talk literature. Like, I don't know. It's always been an escape for me. I think that's part of it is, I hate to say it, I have a very addictive personality, and it's like, if it makes me feel good, I'm going to do it.
I think it's wise to recognize when you have that kind of personality, because I'm the same way. Like, once I find something, I'm just like, I dive in, and it's knee deep. I'm going there. And that's the
and books are a positive thing. Like, it's
right. If I'm going to be addicted to anything, I'd rather it be something like this than,
Yeah, exactly. And I got to tell you something. Like, if I watch movies, I get agitated. Like, I don't find it relaxing. Where a book, forcing myself to sit still, read a book. And I think that also, I got to tell you something. I don't know what it is. And I don't, like, my wife's not a big reader. I don't push books on people, because I think it is just, we all relate in different ways.
Right.
But there's something about just, it's an escape for me. When I was in college, I had a professor who said, he's like, how many, he was talking about like a state of flow. It was a psychology course. And he's like, how often in your life do you lose track of time? And so he was asking people. So the college kids were like, drinking, using drugs,
right,
playing video games, some were like, running or doing sports, having sex, they're like there was these limited things. And he said, as you get older, you're going to find that those opportunities become less.
Right.
Like, I don't know about you, but like, sometimes playing with my daughter, I do that. Like, I'll just lose track. Like, I will get into
you lose track of time.
Or a pet, so I think a pet sometimes get us into that state of flow. But for me, reading's part of that too.
Yeah.
Like, it's like an ego killer. Does that make sense? Like, it kills off your ego. It's like, I'm in that world. I'm in Cuba. I'm in a penitentiary. Like, I feel like it just gets us, it's healthy to kill off the ego, even if it's for 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah. It reminds you that your world is not the only world. There's so much more. And there's so many people living crazy lives that might have stuff in common with yours or be completely different from yours, but we can still connect through this. And the transcendental value, to me too, it's such a treat. And it's gonna sounds crazy, but to pick up a recent book or a book from 200 years ago, and just to know those person's words are still here, and I can, in a way, have a relationship with them, talk to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that.
To me, that's really, really special, which is one of the things that keep me coming back to books.
So, which begs the question. So I'm going to challenge you. Why are you not writing a book?
Oh, because I don't think what I have to say is that important.
I'm not writing a book either. Don't worry. It's funny that you say it, because I think it's like, we all should write a book. Like, I've had a few friends give me like self-published books, and you read the book from their grandma or whatever. Right. And it's like, I remember, a couple times reading the book and be like, this wasn't a very well-written book. But it was a life. Yeah. Like, it was compelling to read, like this old grandma's life, how she ended up, one of them was like, they were in Nazi Germany. They escape, they go to the Bahamas, they start this life. And it's just like, it's interesting. Like, lives are interesting. And I think that we should all take a moment and write down. Like, that book literally started, like, my first memory, was in the Swiss Alps of, whatever. And I always think we should all just write that story down,
it's true.
and
It's
just
true.
for our future relatives. Like I've never had a relative that
So,
wrote a book.
Do you journal?
No. Do you?
No? I do.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I do. It's like reading. It helps me relax. It kind of helps me decompress. And it's not always like deep, like Dear Diary. Oh my God, existential crisis. Sometimes it's just, I had a great day. I had a great conversation or, something simple, but it helps my mind kind of unwind a
That's
little
cool.
bit.
It's
Yeah.
interesting you say it because I think like going back to that idea of like, when you're here, where are you?
Yeah.
And I think that like, that's how I think. Like I'm sitting here talking to you. It's like, who are you? And it's funny. I've actually used that, even that line sometimes, especially like a client, like, who are you really? Like, who
Right.
are you? Like, let's talk about like, we can sit here and be nice to each other or whatever. Or we can really talk about like, why are you in my office? What the hell's going on? Why are you getting divorced? Why are you leaving your business partner? Like, tell me the truth. Let's get down to it. And I think that sometimes reading these books, like someone went to the trouble to say like, okay, here's my thoughts. Here's what I believe. But I also, I think that in understanding, going back to kind of Miami literature, when I was 1987, there was a book called T.D. Allman. Did you pick up that book?
I did. Yeah. So
I'm
going to start reading that one
here's
tonight.
What I want to say. I'd love to come back on the show and talk to you about it because I need to reread it.
Would you please?
I need to reread it, or I may get somebody else to read it and come on with you. Like I find that book so challenging because I'm gonna say something that I don't say this very often. So here I'm gonna say it publicly. That book was very challenging because it looked at Miami in 1987 and said, this is what America is going to look like. And what they focused on was the cultural diversity, the hispanicization they focused on.
Right.
And I'll never forget a college professor, talk about things that college professors couldn't say today. So in a class of, even then Florida State was like half, Cuban American, right? Like half the kids are Latin. And he says, by any measure, immigration is great for society. Like the more immigration you have. And he's like, I'm not open borders, but the higher the immigration, it's like better the culture, the arts,
which makes a lot of sense.
The DNA of the people, like, it's a kind of that guns, germs, and steel idea. Like it's like the more influence, the germs that come in, even like we get healthier bodies because we're fighting off infections. Like you want more immigration. But then he said, he backstopped this like people are yelling in the class when he says this place, like, show me a culture that is not unlivable, that show me a culture that's touched by Hispanics, by Hispanic culture, that doesn't become unlivable in 100 years. Oof. And the Cuban Americans go like, they blew up. I mean, everyone blew up, right? Like what an offensive thing to say. But it was interesting because the book posits, it's like, okay, this is what Miami looks like. This is what United States would look like. And I think when you read the book, you're going to see he's right. Right. Like when I didn't used to go places that everyone spoke Spanish. And now there's nowhere I go in America that the waitress doesn't speak Spanish. Right. Like, I mean, I was everywhere I go, like I love practicing my Spanish and I'll look up the waitress and be like, like she looks like a recent immigrant from, and I'll start, we practice our Spanish. My daughter practices her Spanish. But the point is the book kind of focuses on a lot of those, what does America look like when we have a different thing?
Right. And
I will tell you, it's interesting seeing America come to terms with this because when my great grandmother was first generation German American.
Okay.
So first generation born here.
Right.
Whatever, 1901 or something.
Okay.
And she would say when she was a kid, she remembered going out and if they spoke German, like people would yell at them. But just the point being, because there's a bunch of Germans, right? And everyone's like, those Germans suck. So like she definitely was like, every generation, the Irish, the Italians, it happened to everybody where, you're hated and then you become part of society. So I kind of expect the same thing to happen, that it's just going to wash over.
Right.
And then it's going to be. But T.D. Allman really explores that idea of like, okay, what does it look like to integrate these people, right? To, what does Miami look like after we swallowed 100,000 Marielitos, right? What does that look like? How did that change Miami? How is Texas? How are all these societies going to look? And from 1987 to today, I wish he'd do a follow up. In many ways, I think that the Nicholas book,
Nicholas Griffin.
100 Days.
Yeah.
100 Days. What was the name of it? That you're gonna have Nicholas Griffin on.
Yeah.
He kind of explores that.
That's extremely interesting. This is a city that had so many moving parts, so many components, that I really appreciate these authors trying to make sense of this web, this maze. Yeah. It's amazing. And I thank you for this. I'm so looking forward to it. I'm going to read this, and maybe you can come back and we can have another conversation. It's so fun talking.
Well, I'm a big fan. I love what you're doing here. I think it's so cool. And
thank you so much.
Well, I think it's so important to promote these books and get people reading. Yeah. So yeah, and I wanted to throw this back out. Some of us, I found this book so provocative, and with all the talk of critical race theory and everything. Yes. This book is a good exploration of, have you ever read, I did a lot of prison ministry stuff. I think it's the 47 Rules of Power.
Yes, 48.
48 Rules of Power.
Yeah, I have.
So it's like, it's like a cult classic in prison.
Yes.
And one of the Rule 13 is no matter how great the injustice, when you're asking for help, don't focus on the injustice or its impact on you. How does helping me help you? Right. Like if I'm asking you for help, right, what's in it for you? Exactly. And I think that this book is an exploration of and a way forward on race issues to say, no. Racial equality is going to make society better. And I'll leave with this story. This is another Florida State story. I'm in a graduate seminar, and the professor, a feminist professor, asked me, I'm the only boy, I'm an undergrad. And she says, Mr. Winker, do you think that if women get equal rights, that you, David Winker, you'll be better off? And it's a testament to like the open environment, because I looked at her and I knew I was in trouble. I'm in this class. Like I got to be careful how I answer this. And I said, well, let me start with this. I agree with the premise of your question. Women are not equal. And I actually thought about this morning, because it's like on NPR, they were talking about like still the pandemic has made wage inequality between men and women even worse. Right. Saying that the studies are showing that it's gotten worse. So I'm like, I agree. They are not equal. Two, I come from a family of super strong women. My mom was a very strong woman. My aunts, my sister, like I come from strong professional women. Not that there's anything wrong with being a homemaker, but that wasn't my experience. My mom worked. I was around strong professional women. And I said, but I don't think I'm better off. I don't see how I'm better off. And the teacher spent the rest of the semester changing my mind. But she convinced me. She's right. Yeah, we are better off with fluid gender roles. Right. I really believe that after I got done of having the experience. We are better off if everyone's equal. Right. And this book is an exploration of that. It's like race, equality, and opportunity are not a zero-sum game. We're all better off. If those Black societies, if our Black communities are better off, they're buying more goods, they're paying more taxes, they're like, we're all better off. I like how you say that she spent the rest of the semester teaching you why the alternative was better. Because I also was involved in feminist studies with my English degree. And I had a professor. I come from a family of strong women, but also very strong men. My father, and he instilled in us that women are, we need to be strong, independent, all these feminist ideals. But my professor really wanted me to write a piece where I explored how my relationship with men, i.e. my father, was damaging to me as a woman. And I refused to do that. So it's interesting how professors and teachers, sometimes we forget how we can there's a better impact if you want to show or a student some sort of knowledge. I love that. Oh my God, we could do a whole separate thing on that. That's interesting, because I find it fascinating, Latin culture's attitude toward women. It's like, I've traveled all over Latin America. Like, I don't know what it is. There was a time when I was going down, it was like half the presidents are female. Yeah. Like, we're not even, we're just getting close to having a female president. Like, I'd be down in Costa Rica, like, oh, here's the president. She's female. Like, I really was eye-opening.
It's interesting because we're known for being like machistas and the machismo, but in especially Cuban culture, as extending it to Hispanic cultures, women are very much revered. You know, your grandmother, your mother is almost saintly.
Yep.
Like it's somebody that you bow down to. That.
Well, it's funny. It's anecdotal. I've never seen a study on this, but it's like when I meet all my wife's relatives, the old, like they talk about grandma, grandpa, you meet these old abuelas, these old tias, they're all pharmacists, lawyers, bankers. My wife's family story, her mom, though, how they got out of Cuba was the revolution happened. Grandma worked at Bank of Montreal and they were like, fly to New York. Like your new job's in New York. Like just pick up, get on the plane and fly. And she was a banker. And took her daughter, my wife's mom. It's interesting because I actually went on to, because of that experience, I wrote my thesis in law school on feminist responses to pornography. So I talk about,
that is so interesting.
That's what I wrote about, like Catherine Dworkin and that crew, Andrea Dworkin, Catherine McKinnon, all that, like University of Michigan feminist school about pornography. And it was interesting because I always say I like the crit stuff. I like the crit lit stuff because it took me out of my head. I'm a white guy, right? I am a white male from a certain time period. And I found it very good to be like, boom, here's this other experience. It's very different than yours.
Right.
And I still struggle today because, that's a whole nother discussion about racial, critical race theory. But it's like, I don't feel like it disparages me to say like, you're a woman, your experience has been different than I.
Absolutely.
You deal with stuff that I don't deal with. And I always tell the story is I'll do in law as a lawyer, I'll do marketing. I'll do like a seminar for women about, I think women empowerment in the law. If you, to have a good experience in the law, you have to be a rainmaker. You have to be responsible for your own clients.
Right.
And that takes a whole different skill set. It takes a lot of work. So I go and talk to them about how to create your own clients. And I always start the thing by saying, okay, let me just break the ice. I go out twice a week with clients, lunch, dinner, all these different things to work on relationships, fishing on the weekend, golfing, whatever, I do a lot of those activities. And I said, but when I'm in those situations, there's something I don't need to worry about that you need to worry about. And I always ask them, they never speak up. And I'm like, one thing I don't worry about? I never worry about any of those people wanting to sleep with me.
Yeah.
I know why they're there. They're there because of my legal skills.
Right.
They're not there because I'm pretty. Y'all are pretty and you have to deal with that. So let's just start with that. Right. And I don't think that disparages me. I mean, I don't think it makes me worse that that's the reality of the situation.
And I'm sure they appreciate someone saying, I acknowledge that you have a different experience, which I think is so valuable and we need more of.
And I wouldn't know that without education and reading.
Exactly.
Honestly, I wouldn't know that. I mean, I would know it, but I wouldn't know to talk about it. I wouldn't know how to frame it. I wouldn't know how to speak about it.
Right. Well, thank you, David, so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate all these books and all the knowledge that you shared with us today. So awesome. Hopefully I will have you back soon to discuss more of these. I'm gonna get to these ASAP. And thank you guys so much for watching, for staying with us. If you have any questions, any suggestions for us, we will be more than happy to accommodate. And we shall see you on Wednesday. Bye.